morning. Hello, and welcome to the first fall 2025 session of Careers Beyond Academia, hosted by Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design. My name is Ellie Arnold, and I'm the training specialist at Stem Cell Network, and we're thrilled to be co-hosting this series with Medicine by Design. Our goal with this series, which has been running for a few years now, is to expose as many trainees as possible to different careers that are available after a degree in the life sciences and start to understand some of the qualifications and experience necessary to secure that role. So you can think about what your career path might look like after graduation or from wherever you are now. And we've teamed up to host this series, which has already highlighted a wide variety of careers available after a degree in the life sciences. You can see past Beyond Academia recordings on Stem Cell Network's YouTube. And we have new sessions coming out throughout this year. We have 3 more sessions between now and spring 2026. So keep an eye out for those. Today, we're excited to have 2 speakers who will tell us about their careers in charity and nonprofit organizations, Lara and Larissa, and I'll introduce them a little bit later. I just first wanted to mention that Stem Cell Network also offers other training events. So you can check out our website and social media for many opportunities both Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design offer throughout the year, including workshops, seminars, symposiums. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletters for both organizations to be notified of upcoming opportunities. And the links to sign up can be found on our websites. I just have a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The session will be recorded. The both 2 speakers each speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then we'll turn off the recording, and the joint Q&A and panel discussion at the end will not be recorded. And we'll start with a couple of questions from the moderator, and then it will be open for the audience to ask questions. So think about your questions during the talk, and then please put them in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Or you can raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, and we can unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker for today's session, Lara Green, who is the National Manager, Research and Training Programs at Breakthrough T1D Canada. She has a Ph.D. in Health Biosciences and experience working in research administration and research ethics. She's been with Breakthrough T1D Canada for 3 years as the National Manager of Research and Training Programs and oversees research in Canada focused on curing T1D as well as the Clinical Trials Education Program. And I'm sure you'll learn lots more about that as she speaks. So Laura, please go ahead and share your screen and I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ellie, maybe you can just let me know that that looks okay.
Yeah, that looks great. I'll just turn my video off now while you're speaking, and then I'll come back on at the end of your talk.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be speaking to you today, and I always enjoy doing things like this. So thank you to SCN and CCRM and Medicine by Design for inviting me. So my name is Lara Green, and I have a PhD. And as Ellie mentioned, let me see if I can jump to the next slide. I'm the National Manager of Research and Training Programs with Breakthrough T1D Canada. We formerly were JDRF. We just rebranded last year. So that's the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So we focus on funding research and advocacy and community supports for people with type 1 diabetes. So my background, I have a PhD in Health Biosciences from Brock University, and I'll kind of give you a run through of what my training and career timeline looked like. So I did my master's degree in kinesiology, focusing on biomechanics, and then decided I wanted to move a little bit more in like a health direction. So I did my PhD in Health Biosciences, and as I mentioned, that was at Brock University. And then I started my postdoc not long after my PhD. So I had about maybe a 4-month gap after my PhD, which was really nice break to have. With this sort of timeline, if nothing else, I'm hoping that I can win the title of World's Worst Postdoc Fellow. So I started my postdoc in 2018, and within the year, I went on mat leave with my first baby. And when I returned to my postdoc, it was at the height of COVID. So I was working in a lab where we did research with human participants. And so we were not allowed to enter the lab, basically. So during that time, the only option that I really had was to take some old data sets, and I was sort of mentoring students using old data sets, all done virtually, which wasn't super ideal. Also, within 10 months, I went on mat leave again. So I now have been on mat leave for more time than I've actually been doing my postdoc. And this was probably the opportunity to redeem myself and come back as a stellar postdoc, but instead I completely abandoned my postdoc and decided that I would take my career in a new direction, leave the academic research route. So instead of attempting to get faculty positions, I took a job at the university as a research officer. So every university has the Office of Research Services or something along those lines, and research officers help faculty apply for grants, help manage those grants, implement them, work with research finance, et cetera. So I did that for about a year on a contract position. And then ever since then, I've been the research manager at Breakthrough T1D Canada. So just, I'm not sure if you can, hopefully this screen sharing doesn't view for you. A little bit of the background of my position. So generally, for most nonprofits, you'd have to have a PhD in a tangentially related field. And I say that because I do not have a PhD in type 1 diabetes. I don't have an immunology background. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same field. It's interesting that this said potential salary range. Well, it's nonprofit. So in choosing to work for a nonprofit, you certainly limit your salary capability, but you trade that for the passion and enjoyment of working in nonprofit. So in general, I oversee research grants from landscape review, funding opportunity design, all the way to post-grant impact reporting. And I do a few other things, which I'll kind of get into a little bit later. But I think the main skills are having a knowledge of the research processes. So, from start to finish, what does it look like to, design a research program, apply for funding, get that funding, do the research, and then report on the research afterwards. The cycle restarts. It's also really important to have science communication, including layperson communication. I know that you're probably told that all the time, but it is really something critical that if you want your work to mean something, as many people as possible need to be able to understand it. And then just networking skills. I work with a lot of different people in my role. So being able to discuss things in different audiences, trying to pinpoint what is most important to different people is really important. I think obviously I went into a postdoc, so I was at one point considering being a faculty member, having being an associate professor or a full professor and doing my own research program and things like that. And what really kind of delineated what I was going to do was the fact that I had two little kids during my postdoc and just realized that I wasn't ready for the hustle and grind of being a new faculty member at such a, with little kids at home. And also the fact that jobs are so few and far between. I wasn't ready to pick up my family and move to a different province or a different country when we were just starting to get established in the city that we lived in. I also considered industry research and potentially being a medical science liaison with pharmaceutical, but was really interested in working with nonprofit and getting to do sort of that more community interaction piece. So some of the activities that I do, I mentioned research grants. That's the main component of my role. It's not always the place that I spend most of my time. But when I am doing that, it's certainly a huge chunk of my role. So developing research partnerships is a big part. I know Ellie from SCN because we've now partnered with Stem Cell Network on a few different funding opportunities. We also partner very closely with Canadian Institute of Health Research. So we've had, I'm not even sure the number, maybe 10 to 15 funding opportunities with them. We've had a few other partners. So having those partnerships, discussion, and developing a relationship is a big part of my role. And then reviewing the landscape of type 1 diabetes research needs. So, where are there gaps? Where does funding need to be increased? So deciding on what areas we'll focus on. Then designing funding opportunities never seemed like such a big thing until I was in this role. So I saw the process from the flip side when I was a research officer and I was helping faculty apply for grants. And I remember thinking, oh my God, these funding opportunities are so detailed. I can't imagine why they need to be so detailed. And now that I'm on the funder side of it, there's really a reason that funding opportunities have to be written in such a way because they're basically a contract. So when you write a funding opportunity, every word means something. The way that you write it is going to decide who's eligible and who's not eligible. And it's your only chance to build the boundaries of what research can be funded. So once you've built those boundaries, you're stuck with them. You've got to accept anything that fits within those boundaries. And so that's why we write those boundaries in such detailed language. So it seems a little bit tedious sometimes, but it is really important. And then everything that comes after that. So organizing peer review, getting that research reviewed, setting up the research grants that are successful. I oversee the grant process. We follow our grants really, really closely. So I do annual meetings with PIs. I go to conferences, things like that. So it's a lot of work to stay closely in tune with all of those grants. And then, as I mentioned, communication. So translating science communications into layperson results and impact. That can be blogs and news for the type 1 diabetes community. It can be funding proposals to foundations because we are entirely donor funded. And a lot of donor stewardship. So that's reporting back to donors saying, thank you for your money, here's where it's gone. And that can be hard when, research doesn't progress exceptionally fast. But we need to demonstrate that there's a year-over-year activities happening. So I also oversee our clinical trials education program, early detection or screening for type 1 diabetes activities. And I work with our government relations team as well. So as I mentioned, I help decide how type 1 diabetes funds are allocated in Canada, which is really a big role. And I get to keep the type 1 diabetes community informed. I really like the big picture thinking of my role, as opposed to, when you're doing a thesis, so much about such a little area. I think of it as like a pinhole, but I do a lot of big picture thinking. And I get to see the cusp of new technologies, especially, as things move forward with gene editing and stem cells and things like that. Some of the challenges with my role is certainly the breadth of research that I review. So you cannot have a scientific background in all areas. I look at everything from screening detection to cell therapy to, insulin pumps and CGMs and retinopathy. So there's just no way that you can feel confident having a scientific background in all areas. We're also pretty fast-paced and detail-oriented, which I actually like, but, could be a challenge. The future career trajectory would be, advancing within the organization or moving to potentially a larger nonprofit, translating to industry, really gives you a lot of translatable roles. So my career planning advice, I think most important for a role like mine is exposing yourself to as many different aspects of research possible. So I sat as a student on research ethics boards. Ethics boards almost always have a student position, if not multiple, and that was incredibly helpful. I also got the opportunity to write some ethics policy documents. If you ever get the opportunity to do funding review or even if it's informal, like reviewing if your supervisor is applying for operational grants, review those, help them write it. It's incredibly informative in terms of what you're looking at in the future. Journal review, I'm sure lots of people peer review journal articles, but definitely jump on this opportunity. And if there's ever research committees or anything like that you can sit on, definitely try and do those. I say do the side quests whenever possible. So although, you have your thesis going and you're focused on that and you're, trying to meet your deadlines and things like that, some of the best opportunities that I got was if, a member of another lab wanted to partner with our lab to kind of merge our two ways of two techniques. And I would always say yes. And it led to way more publications. It led to me learning new techniques, even if not formally, but just being around those people. It increases your network. So anytime that you can do, the side projects, I would definitely say yes if you can. And keep an open mind about the transferability of your PhD skills and your area of interest. Again, we go into it with our thesis in mind. We're thinking very specifically about that one thing that we know so much about, and how could we possibly abandon that? But realistically, you're learning general skills that will transfer to almost anything. And just let your area of interest be open so that you're not too pinholed. Okay, I have one last slide, Ellie. So just a few other things. Don't discount the importance of work-life balance, even as a trainee, as best as you can, right? You're still, we know that you work really hard as a trainee and you're the engine that drives research forward, but you need work-life balance. I think supervisor is one of the most important things, one of the most important options as a trainee. So I often say that, in my opinion, compassion trumps prestige. And I had, as you can see, 2 mat leaves during my postdoc. One of my pregnancies wasn't the smoothest, and my supervisor was exceptionally supportive. And I just wouldn't have felt the same about my career trajectory if that hadn't have been the case. I had a death in the family during my PhD, and again, my supervisor was exceptionally supportive. So a lot of times it's the human element of being a trainee that really can make it or break it in terms of you loving the work that you do. So don't underestimate that. And that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Lara, for a great talk. As a reminder, we'll be taking questions for both talks after our next speaker. So Lara will be back in a little bit to take questions. Our second speaker is Dr. Larissa Moniz. Larissa is the Director of Research and Admission Programs at Fighting Blindness Canada, where she joined in December 2019. She has a PhD in molecular biology from the University of Toronto, also has done a postdoc and has worked in research and knowledge translation in a number of health charities, both in the UK and Canada. At Fighting Blindness Canada, Larissa's team works to deliver on the mission of the organization, ensuring that all Canadians have access to appropriate vision care and provide support and information to individuals living with vision loss. So Larissa, please go ahead and share your screen and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ellie. Okay, is it sharing properly, Ellie?
Yep, that looks great.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much to Stem Cell Network, CCRM, Medicine by Design, and Ellie for organizing this webinar. I'm really happy to be here and to share a little bit about what has brought me to my current role. So as Ellie mentioned, my name is Larissa Moniz. I'm the Director of Research and Mission Programs at a not-for-profit called Fighting Blindness Canada. And in my job, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but I lead all of our mission work, which is to fund research, and then we also provide education and advocacy for individuals who have a blinding eye disease. And this includes age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, or inherited diseases like retinitis pigmentosa. So in terms of what brought me to my current role, I went straight from my undergrad to a PhD, and I did both of those at the University of Toronto. For my PhD, which was relatively long, I was in the Department of Medical Biophysics, and my PhD was in molecular biology and signal transduction. with a focus on cancer or oncology. All the way through my PhD, I was pretty focused and interested in ultimately becoming an independent investigator and getting my own lab. At different times I thought about maybe going to med school or maybe going to law school, but the general focus was always to get my own lab. And so I applied for postdocs. And when I was thinking about the postdoc that I was going to do, I had sort of two different factors. One was, I think, the head, one was the heart. So in terms of being really practical, I wanted to go to a lab that was relatively strong, but also was going to teach me some new techniques or new sort of skill sets. And then in terms of more, I guess, the heart, I really wanted to live in a place that I was going to enjoy. So ultimately, I ended up moving to London in the UK, and I did my postdoc also in signal transduction, but with a focus on proteomics at University College London. And my postdoc was about 5.5 years long. And about at the end of year 3, I would say, I started to realize that the project I was working on just really was not going to probably deliver a really high impact paper, or was not going to get my Cell paper and my Nature paper out of this project. And so I sort of had a decision to make at that point, and I thought about I could either start a new project in my current lab, I could potentially move labs, although based on the visa I had, that might not have been quite as easy to do in the UK. But I also practically knew that if I did do this, sort of start a project again, I would need to spend another 2 to 4 years getting a new project started. And at that point, I would need not one, but probably 2 or 3 pretty high impact papers in order to be competitive for a position, especially at a high ranking university or institute. And so coupled with that, sort of the lack of high impact papers, but also with me thinking pretty sort of carefully about where I saw myself, I started to realize that I felt that my strengths lay back more sort of at the project level, that I was pretty good at taking a project and seeing it through, moving it to completion, but I didn't really have either the grand passion or maybe the sort of natural aptitude to develop really complex research programs that you sort of need to lead a successful research group. Or at least that's how I was feeling at the time. So those two things combined, probably high impact paper leading the way, I decided that I was going to leave academia. So I took about a year to wrap up my postdoc, and that really gave me some time to start thinking more carefully about what I wanted to do next. And I looked at a number of different opportunities, and I talked to a lot of different people. So I considered teaching universities. So for instance, liberal arts undergrad only universities, more so in the United States, biotech and pharma, of course, as well as life sciences consulting. And ultimately, I decided to move into the not-for-profit sector, where I felt it fit my values and my interests at the time. My first interest was actually in working potentially in public policy, so maybe ultimately moving into government. But since I didn't have any experience there, I decided to try to gain some experience in this area through the not-for-profit sector. I moved through, if you see, I moved through jobs relatively quickly for the next few years. So I had 3 jobs in the span of essentially a year and a half. But all of each job was a progression on the last one. It sort of got me a little bit closer to a job that fit my skill set. So I started off working in impact and evaluation, moved into being an evidence officer, which was somebody who used data, for instance, prevalence data, disease outcome data, to inform the public policy of the organization. In 2017, I moved back to Canada and got a job at Prostate Cancer Canada, first as a manager of research, and then moved up to the director level. And then in 2019, I got the opportunity to take on my current role, which is the director of research and mission programs at Fighting Blindness Canada. And some of the things about this role that were a bit different about my previous one was the scope of the role. So in this role, I am leading our work from research, education, and advocacy. And when I joined the organization, I also was managing the communications team. But also a big part of it is the seniority, because the director role in our organization is a member of the senior leadership team. So the scope of the role, the seniority of the role, it was quite a bit bigger than my previous one. In terms of what this role is like in a sort of typical health charity, as Lara mentioned, this role typically has a PhD, usually in a health science. Potential salary range can be quite broad depending on the size of your organization, the scope of the role, as well as the experience you're bringing into it. But I think it usually starts at about 100K and moves up to above 200K. In the role, as I mentioned, I oversee the research program. I also lead patient-centered research, and also a big part of my role is translating information to the community. In terms of key skill sets, the three that I think are most important, first of all, is science and health literacy. Having the PhD in this role, it really makes you the topic expert. So while I don't have any previous experience in eye diseases or ophthalmology, with my PhD, I have the ability to learn about all of these areas. And so you really need to have that ability to sort of learn quickly about different areas of health and science. Communication, again, sort of echoing what Lara said, extremely important to be able to communicate very clearly, but also to different stakeholders, whether that is your donors or your community members, other clinicians or researchers, or corporate partners. And that goes hand in hand with stakeholder engagement. So really building strong relationships with all of those people I talked about, but also including with our board of directors. And I already mentioned some of the other careers that I considered, so I'll skip over that. In terms of typical activities, I've broken it into the four main areas that I tend to spend the most amount of time on. So first of all, research. So organizing our grant competitions, managing grant admin, but also developing more of our strategic planning around research. I also lead our advocacy work, which the main focus is about treatment access. And so we do a lot of work to develop and sometimes publish studies to understand the patient experience with different eye diseases and different treatments in order to help inform how we advocate for different treatments with, for instance, the Canadian Drug Agency, with Health Canada, or with other regulators. I do a lot of community engagement and communication as part of my role. As I mentioned, I'm the topic expert in the organization. So I will do things like writing articles. I will moderate events about research or treatments. I'm very often a media spokesperson for the organization. And I also engage with a lot of our donors, whether that is major gift donors who are like individuals with an interest in the cause, or with our corporate sponsors, which when I say corporate sponsors, I largely mean pharma companies. And then of course, sort of admin is like a broad term where I manage a team of up to 5 people. So that takes up quite a bit of time. And then of course, managing things like annual planning, budgets, board committees, and reporting to the board of directors. I would say overall, my role is a little bit unusual in how broad it is compared to potentially other roles in the space. And that's partly because our organization, we're a small to medium-sized health charity, so you end up doing a lot of different things under the mission umbrella. In terms of why I think my role is important, I sort of touched on this already, but I think bringing your scientific knowledge, your PhD, you really strengthen the organization's credibility and reputation by ensuring that there is a robust research strategy, of course, but also being able to translate data into clear and accessible language. And then why do I enjoy my job? I very, very much enjoy my job. It took me a few years, I would say, to get to this role and feel like I was being challenged and my job was meaningful, but I absolutely love what I do now. First of all, it's extremely meaningful to work directly with the community and to see the impact of the work you're doing on them. And I frankly did not think this would be something that was important to me. That wasn't what was driving me in my research career, but in this current role, I find it to be a really valuable part of what I do. I also really love working at the size charity I do, which is, as I mentioned, small to medium sized. It means my work has a lot of day-to-day variety, and I've also been able to be part of the senior leadership team earlier than I probably would have been able to in my career if I was in a larger organization. And that really gives me access to being part of decision making and also learning a lot more about the strategic planning process. In the not-for-profit sector in general, I feel like I've always worked with really engaged and motivated colleagues, which I love, and there's a really good work-life balance. I travel a lot for work and I attend quite a few events, but beyond that, my evenings, my weekends are largely my own, which I really appreciate. In terms of some of the challenges, it's sort of the flip side of what I was saying. We're a small to medium-sized organization, so it tends to be that I do a lot of things, but I'm not really a subject expert in any of them. And also, again, being in the not-for-profit sector and being in a smaller organization, there's always budgetary and capacity constraints, which can sometimes limit the scope of your work. What does it potentially look like in the future for this role? I think at this current organization, I probably have moderate opportunities for growth. There's always new projects. I've got a really good mentor in my current CEO. But if I wanted a more significant challenge or a much larger portfolio, I would definitely have to join a larger organization. And in general, this type of role, being the sort of chief mission, chief research officer, you end up being a really highly valued member of staff because you're bringing a very specific skill set, but there are a limited number of these senior level positions in the health charity sector. But I do think that many of the skills are transferable to other areas, for example, into pharma. And then finally, in terms of what it would be some of my advice for career planning, a lot of this is around what I sort of thought about as I was transitioning out of academia into other roles, or what I wish I had known. The first was to have confidence in the transferability and translatability of your academic skills into other roles. I think having a research background, whether it's a master's, a PhD, or a postdoc, it really has demonstrated your ability to learn and adjust in new environments. So have confidence that you will be able to do that when you take on a new role. A second thing I would say is to not be afraid to take a chance on a job or a new area, because I think it's a really scary moving out of academia that and you've got all these other jobs out there. You don't even know really what they're about, if you're going to like doing it. And I would say give yourself some grace to try out some stuff, but also to potentially not necessarily fail, but decide you don't like it and try something else. Your first job doesn't have to be the sort of job you're going to be at forever. Once you're in a new role, I would also suggest learning some of the soft skills and organizational and ecosystem norms. That's something that was I did not know coming from the sort of labs I'd come from. There's different ways to work in a corporate environment or even a not-for-profit environment. So technical skills aren't quite enough, especially if you want to advance. And finally, I would say to think really hard about what is important to you when you're looking for this new role. Because achievement and career satisfaction, it can really look different ways and it can change over time. This was one of my biggest challenges leaving academia was, first of all, it felt a bit like a failure, to be frank, that I did not get my own lab. And I was really worried about what will people say, what will people think? And frankly, nobody really cares. You really have to find a job that you are going to enjoy and that works with your skill set. And it also took me reimagining what achievement looked like. I had a very specific career path in mind. And so when you start to change career paths, you just have to be open to those opportunities and open to finding career satisfaction in a new way, which I know I certainly have. So that is it for me. So I will stop sharing now.
Great, thank you. And on behalf of Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design, I'd like to thank both Lara and Larissa for fantastic talks.